you to everybody for joining us today. I've personally been really looking forward to this session. As you can probably gather, we're going to make it quite conversational, which I think will be hopefully engaging for you all. Opportunity to share some, I think, useful insight in terms of how businesses can think about making the most of, I guess, the stories that they make every day and the headlines that create, and hopefully help grow their business as a result of those things. You all also have the opportunity to ask questions of our panelists at the end if you want to, but please put them in the Q&A if you want to as we go along. I guess the first thing to do is to introduce our panelists, the founding directors of JournoLink, and I guess find out a little bit why we should spend any time listening to them today. Tet, do you want to go first?
Absolutely. One of the reasons that Peter and I got together with this, and it came from one of his observations after running the small business division of a leading high street bank for a while, was that really we wanted to level the playing field between smaller businesses who never seem to get the oxygen of publicity and the big corporations who could afford 20 Peters and I's to staff their PR department. So we were looking for a way of giving SMEs the opportunity to punch above their weight. Now, for me as a journalist, and I'm a working journalist, have been for 20 plus years in print, broadcast, and online, is that business people are incredibly savvy. They know a lot about the world around them. The one thing they don't seem to get a hold of is journalists and how they think. So either they are inappropriately paranoid that, you meet a journalist, he's going to bury you, he's going to kill you, he's going to destroy your reputation, and so on and so forth. Or they're completely total innocence in what the journalists need. So one reason you should listen to Peter and I hope that we find this a constructive session, is that I can tell you what a journalist is looking for you. So when you encounter them, you can do what they need for you to do, so they can do what they need to do for you. Yeah. So it's a completely symbiotic relationship. As a journalist, I could not live without your input. I need your quotes. I need your insights. I need your understanding of your sector, your industry, your locality, the business that you run. I need your predictions about what you fear or hope the future is going to be. Above all, I need your case studies. Here's one I made earlier. Because without any of those things, I know quite a lot. I blow my own horn. I know quite a lot about lots of things, but not enough about any to write a story without the input of the likes of you. So that's why we need to get together, listen to each other, and hopefully help each other along. Peter?
Yeah, so I'm the sort of the business side of this equation. Tet's the journalist who used to get hold of my ankles and run me ragged when I was being interviewed on behalf of the banking side. But Tet's right. We got together to give small businesses that can't afford a PR agency, don't know how to do PR, to give those businesses the opportunity of getting PR coverage. Why do PR? Because 19 out of 20 of us now make our buying decisions based on independent recommendations and reviews. And the best way you can possibly get those is by convincing a journalist to mention your brand. So really, really important that we give small businesses the opportunity to engage with the media, with journalists to get their brand stories out there. One thing I'm just going to pick up on that Tet's just said, and then we'll pass it back to Damon to give you a couple of examples of what you might want to be focusing on. One of the things Tet said was that you shouldn't be scared of journalists. And we meet a lot of businesses who, are really worried about their confidence and what's the journalist going to ask me and what might go wrong. Get in your mind that you are more important to the journalist than the journalist is to you. Without your stories, the journalist has got nothing to write. It's the journalist's job. It's their future. It's their career. So they really, really do need you and want to hear about the stories that you've got and your successes. You can split journalists into two. You can get the national journalists and you get the regional journalists. What I found is that the regional journalists just love to talk up the success stories in their local region. National ones are sort of more confrontational, and they are looking for a story that is a bit more provocative. But the regional journalists are really the ones that want to hear your stories. So, keep that confidence level up. And I promise you, if you end up on the BBC on a TV interview, I promise you, everybody around you will say you did really well. Your family, your kids, your neighbors, your workmates will never say that you screwed up. They'll all say you did really well. Whereas if the journalist makes a mess of it, they get reminded very quickly by the producer that they've not done well. So, be confident, use PR because it is hugely valuable. We'll talk a little bit later about the difference between advertising and PR, but, do use it. Very, very valuable. Damon, you've got a couple of examples that you might just want to point out, I think.
I nearly had a real life example, actually, because my dog literally just nearly eat my kids' homework.
There's the headline. There's the headline.
There is a headline. So I just disappeared quickly to prevent that happening, because obviously that would put me in the doghouse. Eleanor, do you just want to sort of move on to the next slide, if that's okay? So, gents, I saw this picture in the local paper the other day, and I guess it's around a small gift shop in Worcester, which is my hometown, that was recently awarded I think it was the best small shop in Britain by the Independent Retail Consortium. And I guess my first impression was, who cares, really? With everything else that's going on in the world, have they got nothing better to write about? But why is this kind of story important?
I'll tell you why that kind of story is important to me as a journalist. If wherever the shop is, we just found a local hero. Everybody loves a story about a local hero. And that's why your local media is so very important. One of the things that happens is that pandemics and recessions are very easily talked up. If we go into panic mode, if we go into doom and gloom mode, we can create a recession in the United Kingdom. But by the stories that we put out as businesses, we can actually influence the state of the economy. And if we influence the state of the economy in a positive way, it reflects back to us. So the key thing about this gift shop that's been crowned the creme de la creme of the whole of the United Kingdom is, wow, it happened in our town. How will that make all my local people feel? That's a sort of story that I'm gagging for. Anytime, give me a story like that. I love it.
Let me pick up a couple of things from that. It's a brilliant example, Damon. It's an absolutely brilliant example. The first thing I'm going to pick up is who wrote it, right? So you can see in small print there, Barry Kinghorn there, community content editor, right? So this is not gift store editor. This is not Worcester editor. This is community content editor. And the key thing here is the headline and the story. The story is not about what that shop does. The story is about the success in the community. And so often when as businesses, we put out our press releases, we're focusing way too much on what we as a business do, not on what the journalist wants to write about. So think about, what is the trending story? What is the interest story that the journalist wants to write about? And in this case, it was about an award that's been won by a local business, nothing to do with what they actually did. So a couple of points there. Look who wrote it, and that's what's driving the story. The timing for it and what the story is. The story is, we won an award, we're a successful business in the locality. That's really good. One other bit that I'm just going to pick out of that is the image, the picture. Whenever you put a press release out, always attach a good image. You've got about 4 times more likelihood to pick up if you've got a good image attached to it. And as if you look at print, it's very rare you turn over the page of the newspaper and don't see pictures relating to the stories. So if you just put a story out, just put a press release out without any picture, you're unlikely to get picked up. Needs a good image. But they've been really smart with that image because they've got their brand right in the middle of it. So whenever you put your image up, make sure your brand is discreetly hidden in that picture, because that is a free advert on that news feed. So think about your image. It's a relevant image. It's a relevant picture. It's got the award there and everything. But nicely between the two heads is the brand. Even if that image is clipped you're still going to get that brand shown in your image. So think about your story, think about the image, and think about the local success and the local coverage on it. Damon.
If I was to walk into that shop on Saturday, assuming I can get in there, because I'm assuming it's going to be pretty rammed, what advice could I give the people there in terms of leveraging that story further? Is there any potential for it to go national, or?
Oh, I mean, this is what I was going to come to, is that this is only the beginning. Actually, PR isn't something you wake up in the morning and decide, right, I'm going to do a bit of PR today. PR is the strategic communications process. That means that you plan it. Okay. Now, they didn't become voted into this position for doing nothing. At the same time, you can bet your bottom dollar that they've had dark times, times when they thought maybe their business wouldn't fly, and so on and so forth. Now, it's the storytelling you put together about the backstory behind this that really gets people's attention. That is grist to the mill for every reporter and for every editor. In fact, we say that PR is earned coverage because of storytelling. It's the stories you tell that enhance people's appreciation of their own situation, that inspire people, and so on and so forth. So the human interest behind that is massive. By the way, if you're dealing with financial services and so on and so forth, with the very greatest of respect, money doesn't have a personality. The people who make and use money do. So it's that personality that you want to bring across in a story. That a company doesn't have a story. The people behind the company have the story. So actually, in many cases, what the journalist is looking for is the story behind what you're doing, one, and two, the insight that gives the public about your sector of business.
Damon, key point on this, and it's a really good question you ask. What do you say to the people that are there? Their story is fine. Their story is absolutely fine. You go in there, you've got good coverage, keep milking it and use social and things like that. But your question around how do you make that story land is absolutely key. And, a lot of us, we're really good at what we do running our businesses, but we're consumed by what we do running our businesses. And we assume that everybody else shares the same passion as we do about our business and what we make, what we sell. That's not necessarily true. If you want to get other people reading your stories, and if you want to hook the journalist, you've really got to challenge, am I interesting? Is the story I've got really, really interesting? The key I used to use, still use, is, the 12-year-old test. So if I want to put something out there, have I got a 12-year-old kid or cousin or neighbor or whatever it is, and just give them that bit of news you want to put out and say, are you interested? And if you can drag them away from the euphemistic PlayStation for them to read that and they're interested, it's probable that other people are going to read it. So really test it on people who you think will be quite critical of what you're doing. But I'm just going to flip back to the image that you got up there, and your question around how do you hook people? Look on the most read bit, just to the right of the image, the list there. That number one most read on that particular newswire. Worcester Chip Shop and Pub team up to beat Tier 2 restrictions. That's the most read one. Why? That's the one that's going to fly. That's the one that the BBC are going to pick up and start covering. Why? Because you've got two entrepreneurial people who've got together and found out how to beat Tier 2 restrictions. It's not a story about a pub. It's not a story about a chip shop, but it's a story about how two bright people have achieved something that we're all trying to achieve at the moment. So, it's timing, it's relevance, it's edgy. That's what people are going to pick up on. So, the provocative headline, the provocative line is so important when you're trying to get picked up and noticed. Yeah, Chet, you go.
Yeah, you see, can I just say that journalists are and are not honest brokers in this. I didn't go into this profession to be unread. I didn't become a journalist to be unshared. I became a journalist so that I could share my point of view, my take, or whatever my shtick is about life, and every journalist is the same. So when you're sharing material, think about what the journalist, could be the reporter, or the editor of that bit, because ultimately it's the editor who spikes the story or runs it up the flagpole or elevates it to the front page. You've got to get a sense of what that medium, that title is into. Now, they did some research, and 47% of journalists said that one of the things that really engages them is familiarity with the work that they do. They're talking about relevance. So that means that you've got to try and get a sense of which media work for you, what kind of ethos sits well with your company, and what kind of ethos sits well with whichever title that you're going for. So that is also very, very important. Now, finally, if I say something about financial services, it's a weird arena. They have one obsession: stability, because everybody makes money when things are stable, meaning that they are absolutely paranoid about disruption, or are absolutely fascinated by disruption, because disruption can lead to something with extra profits. So if your stories around finance and so on and so forth can elucidate existing trends to, if you like, flatten the curve, to make things more stable, or warn people of what's coming up, or warn people about the opportunities that might be arising, there you have stories in finance. It's always about finance. Finance is based on stability. And because it's based on stability, finance is very interested in instability or warnings of instability of any kind. So there again, this is a way of making yourself relevant to the journalists who are working in those arenas.
It comes back to the story. Damon, flip the other picture up that you've got, because I know you've got another case study there that's worth
I mean, this is interesting. So you know, lots of focus when we came out of the first lockdown around trading safely and doing all the right things. And I saw this in the press when I was on holiday, and I thought, oh God, there's no such thing as bad press. Is that a real thing? And can you explain the benefits of this kind of story?
Yeah, I mean, to my heart, there's no such thing as a bad press. You're absolutely right. And that's, you know, I nailed my colour to the mast absolutely on that. The picture you got up here is a classic one for this. All press coverage gets your brand out there. Now, clearly you want the right story. Clearly you want it to be positive press. And we said 19 out of 20 people now use recommendations and reviews based on recommendations, you know, in the buying decisions. So really, really important. Now, what this guy's done with his pub, he's got a brilliant story. This isn't about I'm serving beer. This is about I put an electric fence up in my pub. Now, it doesn't matter whether that electric fence actually works or not. And frankly, it probably doesn't, because it's probably a bit against.
Oh, he'd be prosecuted if he killed anybody.
Yeah, probably isn't the smartest thing to stick in your pub. But it's a brilliant story, and that's almost guaranteed to be picked up by, you know, mainstream news channel. You can see mainstream news channels pick that up. It's a brilliant story. It's a consumerist story, and you know, it's lovely. That is never going to be bad press. That's always going to put a smile on people's face. Tet's been talking about how the journalist thinks. You know, I always put my hat on, right? How does the business think about getting this story out there? And I come back to the headline. You know, the headline quite simply there is electronic fences in a bar. You know, it's a brilliant story. One thing to think about your headline is when the journalists are looking at this, they'll be looking at it on their iPhone, they'll be looking at it on their tablet, and you've got to think how many characters they've got as the headline that they're going to see immediately. You get about 3 seconds of attention span of a journalist. And if you don't get your headline right and they can't see what that headline is, they will pass on that email or on that release. They'll be getting, I mean, Ted will tell you, you'll get 200-300 emails a day. That headline is critical. We've actually got built into JournoLink. We'll tell you a bit about JournoLink as we go through, but we've actually got built into it a tool where you can test what that headline looks like on different devices that a journalist will be using. Critical thing on this would be, you know, I'd start with the headline around electric fence around bar to respect coronavirus. So what I see in the headline is electric fence around bar. That's the story, and it's a great storyline. And you know, Damon, you don't get bad press like that.
You know, 3 things come out of straight to my head is that you can take confidence from this, that confidence is the most important thing, because none of you yet run a business which will influence the exchange rate of sterling to the dollar. None of you are special and political advisors. None of you are SPADs. So because of that, a journalist, 9.9 out of 10 journalists will put their arms around you. You are not an adversarial, you are not the sort of person they're going to be hostile towards. What this guy's done, it's probably a stunt, and it's a hoot. The second thing about it is that his timing is exquisite. We are all, especially those of a certain age, we're a little bit iffy about personal distance and, our susceptibility. I mean, I'm not, at my age, I'm not bomb-proof anymore. My son might be, but I'm not. And so this feeds into a lot of fears that many people have. So this is also hugely trending news. Now, when you go to your business, you have to see the issues that are trending. This man's going to become another local hero. People will remember him for years after the pandemic as the guy who put up the electric fence. And it's great publicity for him.
That's great. And I think, the fact that I mentioned it to you guys just shows how, that's a July story and I'm still talking about it in December, which is
really July, yes.
Yeah.
Damon, what it picks out, is this word timing. We talked a lot about the story and getting the headline right. Equally important is the timing. There are three measures on timing. One is when you want to put your news out, and you've got to work really hard at that, because you putting your news out is of no interest to anyone else until you convince them that it is. So you've got to work really hard about trying to capture people on your news agenda for your new launch, your new product, whatever it might be. The other two ways of looking at timing are a lot easier. One is when the news is trending. So here's a classic example with this pub here. And yeah, it's up in July, it's still trending now because we're all interested in distancing and things like that. So news that's trending, really important. And you can find that out in various different ways. It's news that's actually out there trending. It's news that might be coming up, or it's news that suddenly comes up. The news that might be coming up, again, something we do on JournoLink is have a calendar of events and government data that's coming out, key news days that are coming out. When's it kebab day? When's it cake day? When's it diabetes day? All those days are really good hook times for journalists to be looking for stories. So second area is when the news is likely to come out. Then the third time that it's really easy to get the journalist is when they're actually writing their story and looking for the case study. And journalists frequently put out requests for business case studies, specific businesses or community comments or personal comments, things like that. Journalists are always looking for those case studies. We had one again, funnily enough, at the same time as this one went out in the middle of the year, when we had a media request come through JournoLink for somebody over 50 who'd invested their life savings in starting a business. And somebody in the office just threw my cap in the ring because they thought that might be quite humorous. And 3 days later, I got a call from a freelance Telegraph journalist, was interviewed. A couple of days after that, had some photographs taken. And 3 weeks later, we had a double-page spread in the Telegraph magazine on a Saturday. Nothing to do with the business JournoLink, but about an individual, a story, who'd done something that was of interest. But what we did have in that article in the Telegraph, very much like the landlord has got here, is our brand name. And when you get your brand name in articles like this, so you got the Star in St. Just Cornwall in this one, we had JournoLink in the Telegraph, it enhances your social search, your SEO, your optimization on Google and things like that. So really important to use the PR side to get your brand out there for your social media. But three things on timing. Your timing, got to work really hard on that and have a really spinny headline. Watch the news and see what's trending and piggyback on that. And then watch for the media requests coming through from journalists. And again, something on JournoLink that we do is have those media requests coming through that come to you in your inbox.
So, well, one other thing that people often worry about is they say that, oh, I sent out a press release and nobody got back to me. journalists are really, really busy. I mean, they have quite a lot of many other things. The one resource every single journalist on this planet is short of is time. And so when you're sending out press releases, think long term. Don't expect to get a one hit. There are some people who land a scoop with their first press release. They are not the average person. So you need to be, if you're using tools like ours, you need to be thinking about this over at least like a 3-month period. That's how you build relationships. People get to notice you and so on and so forth. There's one other thing which you mustn't tell anybody, but which I will own up to you, is that actually journalists spend half their time looking at the work of other journalists. Okay. So what that means to you is that, say, for example, the man with the electric fence, this will be shared by so many other journalists. Okay, so what that means to you is that you don't need to connect with every journalist. You need to connect with the journalist that gels with you. Then you'll have somebody like me reading that story and thinking, how on earth could they have missed the angle that I can see in that story? That's when your phone rings. You didn't even send me a press release. So the important thing is to select or be aware of the kind of media that you're interested in, of the kind of journalists you're interested in. Build your relationship with them over time. They will do your work for you.
Just on that, because I've a couple of questions that kind of have come in previously and stuff like that. One of the questions is that, a lot of people are nervous around speaking to journalists, and I guess, is that justified? And I guess the second part of that is, how do people make themselves ready so they're less nervous, but also how would they build a relationship with a journalist? So I guess it's kind of all kind of linked to what you just talked about, really. I guess nervousness, getting prepared for it, and then building those relationships. Do you want to cover up a little bit?
It goes a bit to what Peter said before, is that the person who's really kind of uptight about the thing is a journalist, because I have to craft a story. It's very rare that I'll pick up your press release and print it verbatim. I mean, it's as a matter of pride, I couldn't do that. So what that means is that you need to be as relaxed as possible when you're dealing with a journalist. 1, 2, recognize that a journalist is just like, we don't come from planet Zog. We're perfectly regular people. If we're not picking up your press releases, it could be our day, if it's a man, to do the school run. Happens all the time. People don't seem to understand that journos are just regular folk. And thirdly, actually, your greatest protection of all is who you are. If you're an SME, most journalists want to help you tell the best story you can. So when they're asking you questions, I'm normally probing for you to give me an angle which is really hot. Now, you come in thinking that, okay, you want to talk about X, Y, and Z. And I'm thinking in my head, yeah, okay, give me something better. And the way I do that is by probing you with questions. I'm not trying to trip you up. Now, all of that is absolutely true, I bet, for every person who's listening to this webinar, unless you're a board director of a Fortune 500 company. Then the words that you utter can affect stock prices. The words that you utter can change exchange rates. The words that you utter can influence interest rates. That is a totally different kettle of fish. Now, that was the kind of world that Peter was in.
Yeah,
but look, that wasn't the world that any of you are in. That's why you should feel at ease.
The story is the same, right? And the approach is the same. Have 2 things in your head. You're the journalist pimp. You are there to help the journalist get good stories, because without those good stories, you're not going to get covered. But it's your gig, right? So the game really is getting your story over. Whenever I learned this over a long while, but happily share the tips. Whenever I got interviewed by a journalist, I'd always start the conversation by, look, we can do this in 2 ways. Do you want to ask me your questions, or do you want me to tell you what the story's about? Every single one would reply, tell me what the story's about, please. And the reason they did that was because they didn't actually know. They got an idea that this might be worth talking about, or their producer or researcher had said, speak to this guy. But they didn't really know the story. So they really need you to help them get that story over. So to your point, Damon, here that says, how do I get my story over, and how do I land the right things? And I feel nervous about what I might be asked. Take control of this. Honestly, the journalist wants you to guide them through this and give them a good story and good broadcast. So it's a bit in the prep. Sit down and write down, what 3 things do I want to appear in this story? And actually, what quote do I want to appear in this story? And it's perfectly legitimate to say to a local print journalist, look, let me give you a quote. And what I'd like to say is this. And do you know what? 9 out of 10 times, they'll take it.
Absolutely, they'll take it.
You're helping them get a good story.
Yeah.
So, don't be nervous about those interviews. And, I get it, because, I've absolutely been at the other end of the phone with a lot of these interviews. And you do think beforehand, oh, I hope they get it right. I hope they don't say the wrong thing. But it's up to you to control that. And, as Tet said, be yourself. The journalist wants you being yourself and wants a good story that people are going to read. And certainly the local or the regional journalists will be quite positive and help you get your success stories out there. So, be confident about it, be happy about it. And that's absolutely fine. One thing
it does do is that it helps a lot if when you're speaking to the journo, you know what he's done. It's always useful to know what that medium does. Okay. Then you can angle what you say to what they're interested in, because every medium has a position. Every journalist has a position. Every journalist will tell you that they're completely objective and so on and so forth. It doesn't happen because they have a purpose, they have a mission, they have an editorial position. So if you know a little bit about that, then you can tell your story in the way that best suits them. Everybody's happy.
I think that resonates quite strongly in terms of, it's worthwhile spending a bit of time researching the angles that they've taken in the past. And I think, Peter, you said, working out what you think the headline should be and 2 or 3 things that you want to get across and being quite succinct sounds like really, really good advice. You mentioned earlier, Peter, that in the current climate we're in, that a lot more people are taking independent kind of viewpoints and looking at third-party reviews and things like that. They become more and more important to consumers. And I guess especially when it's harder for us to get out and test things ourselves and stuff like that. Can you just explain to me how a service like JournoLink can probably help in that regard?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the key questions that you get, we talked a lot about story and we talked about timing. We talked about getting other journalists, make sure you get the right ones. The big sort of hanging question there is, okay, I've never done it. How do I do it? Because I'm scared. I don't know how to do it. Look, there are 3 ways that you can engage your PR strategy. One is you can go to a PR agency and you can ask a PR agency to do it. And nothing wrong with PR agencies, but you need a fairly big budget to employ one. And most small businesses can't afford that, which is why we started JournoLink. The second way that you can do it is do it yourself. So you can go down to WH Smith, you can spend a couple of hours there if you're allowed in the shop. You can copy all the magazines, you can copy all the contacts, and you can start sending emails off to the editors of all the magazines. Most of those will go to spam, and it's very unlikely that you'll be picked up from a direct email just being sent to one of those editorial addresses. So the third area, and again, which is behind what we've built in JournoLink, is to use an online platform that in essence holds your hand and does everything that you need to do. There are 3 key things that you've got to look for in any platform that you use. And we'll talk you through the JournoLink one. The JournoLink one is built for small businesses. It's really user-friendly. It's really affordable. So, for us, that's the default one that every business should be going to. But there are other enterprise solutions out there, and it's right to say that. 3 things you should be looking for, as well as the affordability and the ease of use. One is a good distribution model. So this saves you trying to find out which journalists you want to send your news to. We do all that for you. So we segment our journalists by sector, by geography. We let you drag your own list in as well. So you can have your own list in there and you can just distribute to that list. We let you buy lists if you want to buy a list and have full contact details of the journalist. But point number 1, make sure there is a good distribution and good access to the journalists that you need. So tick 1, we have that. Second thing you're looking for, and on your distribution, a really easy template to use, holding hand stuff, tips and tricks as you go through, us checking it for you. We look at every release ourselves before we actually release it to the journalists. Even though you press the button said send, we check it ourselves as well. So you've always got somebody with another pair of eyes keeping an eye on it before it goes out. Second thing to look for is the media requests. We get an awful lot of pickup through social media, our social media channels, and from the media requests that are going through. We intelligently scrape Twitter and various other of the request systems that the journalists use, and we send those requests to you. All you have to do is reply to that email that comes to you, and that goes straight back to the journalist. And if the timing's right, you're fast on that, and you're relevant, you've got to be relevant. You know, we do see some businesses replying to everyone saying, please use me in your article. Guess what? They're never going to use you. They won't be in touch with you. But if it's relevant, that's a great way to engage. So have the media request route as well. We provide that for you as well. Then the third thing that's pretty critical is having a media room yourself, having a press room on your website. So it's fine you doing a press release or responding to a media request, but if that just disappears into the ether, it's no use to you. Keep it on your website. So on your website, you should have a dynamic press room for people visiting your website to see what you've been up to and what you've said. Now, we give you that again on JournoLink, and that's quite unique. Other enterprise solutions don't give you that. We give you the URL for that. You can customize it to your brand, your feel, your logos. You can put in there your marketing collateral, your contact details, social handles. We automatically pick up Twitter through that, and we automatically put any press releases you issue, we automatically update that. So we give you the URL, sits on your website, and then you forget about it. But it is current, and everything you put through the JournoLink membership subscription that you have with us gets put on there and updated. That's really important because that keeps you as a live business as well. So 3 key things: distribution, good list of journalists, the media request route as well, because that's really important, and that press room. There's a lot of other stuff that we've got on the JournoLink platform, which you can look at, www.journolink.com, have a play around, you can see it all. But they're the key 3 things that you're looking for in any platform that you use.
Thanks, Peter. And we will send out a follow-up email to the people that have attended anyway with that link on after this. Tet, you mentioned earlier around confidence and the role that PR can play in building confidence. And I guess we're heading up to Christmas, and we've just come out of some version of a national lockdown with different tiers now in place, etc. But I'm guessing people will start feeling a bit more confident as we approach to Christmas. But what role does PR actually play in building that confidence, and how important is it?
Okay, it's often said that we can talk up a recession just by the glumness of the communications that we put out. So as long as your PR is advocating solutions, nothing wrong with talking about problems. Problems are interesting, but the most interesting thing about a problem is the solution to that problem. And as long as you're doing that, you're actually not only giving your brand a good fighting image and yourself the image of a person who's incredibly resourceful, what you're doing is that you're inspiring other people. Now, I used to do the breakfast show on Colourful Radio, and at the top of the day, you just want to give people a lift. You don't want them to leave. Well, in those days, we could actually leave the house and go to work. You want them to leave the house with a spring in their steps. I mean, they hop into their car, they go on their way to work. So at the top of the day, you want positive news. And positive news is grist to the mill for any economy. It's part of the invisible hand that makes our economy tick over. So people are always programmed to look for good news. Always programmed to look for good news.
Couple of things on this positive thing, So this is dear to my heart, this is. I put a blog out a few weeks ago on how important it is that we put positive stories out to the media now. Why? Look, as a nation, we love to read about other people's woes. We just love it. We watch TV programs about outtakes that have gone wrong, and we roar with laughter. We just love, we're a negative bunch in this country. And we've got the ability to keep talking negatively, or we can turn it around. A couple of news stories that have been out in the last, well, there was one yesterday, funny enough, that I listened to last night that was really interesting to me, and we just love. There would have been very, very few people in this country shouting for Donald Trump to overturn the election in the States. Now, they might have been in the States, but over here, we just loved to see him making a fool of himself, trying to say there'd been fraud all over the election in the States. We like that sort of thing. I was listening to the radio last night on Parliament Today on Radio 4 last night. In the House of Commons, Boris challenged one of the Labour MPs who asked a question. The question was a very good question, and it was challenging Boris, and he replied with his prepared response, it was a shame Labour didn't vote in terms of the lockdowns. And it turned out the MP that had asked the question, the Labour goat, had actually gone against the Labour whip not to vote and had voted. And it left Boris doing his usual bumbling stuff because he'd been caught out. We just love to hear those cock-ups. So we can keep, that's what we like reading. So journalists will keep writing about those. And, that was the clip that Radio 4 used last night on the radio. So they will keep doing that unless we turn the agenda round to be positive. So we've a choice of businesses now. We can be saying, we're coming out of lockdown, we've survived, we pivoted in a certain way, we didn't furlough, we've got all those things that are going, all the positive stuff. We can come out with those stories. And believe me, local journalists love to hear it because they're the success stories. Or we can keep pumping out the negative stuff, which is, I'm not getting the funding, I can't survive, we've had to lay people off. And they're the stories the journalists will keep writing about. So as Ted said, we can talk ourselves into a recession or we can talk ourselves out.
Now, you see, I don't mind people saying, look, we're going to go out of business if you don't give us the funding that we require. What I really want to hear is what you're suggesting should be done. That's the story for me. And you see, as long as you've got a solution or a prescription for something, you will very likely get coverage.
Can I we've had a question that's just come in from Martin, which says, are you covering the entire UK and overseas? If you can just pick that up, that would be.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So the platform that we've got, it is a global platform. It can be, we can send anything to any journalists around the world, but our database is just UK. So we focus on the UK. We've got about 10,000 journalists on there, from BBC down to bloggers. Bloggers are quite useful, but we don't have journalists on the platform from overseas locations. If you do want stuff sent to an overseas location, then it's quite simple for us to add those on, or you to add those onto your personal list, and we can distribute to those journalists as well. So,
and surely you can buy the list as well if you want.
Indeed. So don't be constrained by saying this is just UK. Yes, we can send it out to other jurisdictions, but you need to bring those journalists to us or buy that list in.
Okay, that's really good. I read some the other day, I was reading a McKinsey's report around confidence. It's just kind of linking onto that, to what we just talked about. But something like 10% of businesses in the UK felt that they were going to struggle to survive the next 6 months. And I guess the people on this call and myself, how do you actually, if PR plays such a great part in kind of like building confidence, stuff like that, how do you actually find those stories in your business? When you're busy doing all those other things, paying supplies, paying your staff, ordering things, how do you actually find the stories or create those news headlines within your business? How do you recognize those things?
Yeah, that's probably the hard thing, actually, Damon. Out of all of this, as I've said, you're really good at running your business, and you're fighting fires at the moment. You need to take a bit of time out, just 20 minutes, pour a beer and sit there, think, right, what are the tangential angles here that other people might be interested in? I remember one of the first businesses that signed up to JournoLink, this is 6 years ago, and I actually phoned them up and said, why have you signed up? How can we help you? And he said, well, we're the most boring business in the world. If you get me media coverage, you've done better than anyone else. So I asked a bit about, so what business do you do? And he said, we manufacture drill bits. And I boiled it right the way down and finally said to him, well, what's your biggest disappointment since you started in business? And he said, well, we just made 10 years profits, but Dragon's Den turned us down. His story was nothing about drill bits. His story was Dragon's Den turned me down and we just made 10 years of profits. And that headline and that story got broad scale coverage. So it's the elegance of just sort of sitting down for 20 minutes and thinking about what is it that other people might be interested in. What's the trending news? What are the angles that isn't just, my business? Think about the trending news. We'll be coming out of lockdown in January, February. We'll all be out shopping. So what are you going to do? Are the small shops going to survive? Are they going to replace our Arcadia and Debenhams? What part do you play in that? They're the stories that the journalists are interested in. I was speaking to a Sunday Times guy on Tuesday, looking for what he's going to write this coming Sunday and the Sunday after. And the sort of stories he is already looking for are, what's the impact of Arcadia and Debenhams? Now, are you in the supply chain for those? Are you being affected by those failures and the exit from the high street of the big department stores? How is that affecting you? And it's how it's affecting you. That's the story. So hard part about what is my story. And that's when you just have to sit back a little bit and put the journalist head on and think, what are they going to be looking for?
Damon, if you think about it also, I mean, there are multiple sources of a story in your business. It could come as a finance story, your company structure, the kind of alliances you made, the associations that you formed, how they're going to be influenced by your current situation. It could come from your team, everybody from the founder to your workforce. How are they coping with this thing? What is their take on the situation? What is their view of what the future holds? It could come from your daily operations. I mean, is there what changes have you made and how have they impacted your sector of business? Your value proposition, have you changed it? Are you operating your business in a new way? I mean, we've been through this pandemic like everybody else, but our value proposition keeps improving and refining all the time, and we put it out there. And finally, how are you affecting the lives of your customers or not? So these are all ways in which you can provide the most important thing that a journalist is interested in: insight. Insight. It's what we need, is insight, to keep people informed of what's going on, what the new and emerging trends are going to be, and also solutions, ideally, if you've got them.
So I guess that kind of comes back to that little thing around the chip shop and the pub in Worcester, doesn't it? How they've pivoted their business to adapt. It seems like a very kind of like, so what, but actually when you read the story and understand how they've adapted their business model to make the best of a bad situation, it's the pivot thing, isn't it? It's all those kind of things. I think really good advice. We have another question from Karen that talks about, do you cover international stories? And I'm going to add on to that, what is the challenges surrounding this and Brexit? How do you see that playing out? Is there an opportunity for SMEs there?
Yeah, there'll be a lot of stories and calls for Brexit from journalists, a lot of media requests coming through. They'll be coming through in the next few weeks. I mean, it's quite interesting, the pandemic stuff and the lockdowns and the tiers have just sort of taken it this week. But as soon as we get some clarity on which way we're going, or lack of clarity, then the journalists are going to be asking for that. So to pick up Karen's question here about, do we cover international stories? Tet will comment on that from a journalist perspective. But we see quite a lot of businesses talking about exporting to other countries. We had a cracking business, which was a tea business being run from the back of somebody's kitchen. And they'd actually won a contract for the Hilton in Shanghai for this tea business. And of course, the headline went out, local business exports tea to China. There's the headline. It's always going to get picked up. So international stories of UK business successes, exporting out to those international countries, yeah, well worth doing. Some will be picked up in those countries as well. So in the UK and on our database, journalist database, we have a lot of journalists that cover overseas jurisdictions as well. So they're UK based, but they'll write on behalf of Asia or on behalf of the States within their magazines and within their publications, their trade publications and their titles. So yeah, absolutely put your stories out relating to international business as well as UK.
I think that after this pandemic thing is put away, international stories are going to be all the rage, because the United Kingdom is going to have to punch above her weight. We've lost the EC. We're going to have to sell stuff abroad. So international stories are absolutely the way that I think every business journalist is going to be interested. But I think that we're a little way off from that, because our prediction, a lot of journalists feel that how we're going to parlay the vaccine, which is the vaccine is the story now. Yeah. How we're going to parlay the vaccine and how the vaccine affects work. That is going to be the biggest story that's running over the next month. It's going to be huge. You and the vaccine, your company and the vaccine. Stories like that are going to be very interesting indeed.
That's interesting. I mean, so we're basically saying we go out of lockdown, then it's the vaccine, then it's probably going to be Brexit in terms of a phasing thing. So I guess that kind of helps kind of frame some of the conversations people can have after this around their own businesses and looking for headlines or stories that will be relevant. I've got a question for myself actually, and I guess it's kind of why is this important to Swoop, and why do we kind of spend time with JournoLink and work with you guys? And so for me, my 9-year-old daughter was asking me around PR and what that kind of meant the other day, and I was saying, look, we've spent I've been with Swoop since January, and we spent a lot of the time supporting businesses getting funding, lots of it related to COVID, lots of growing businesses as well who have made the most of those opportunities in distribution and areas like that. But actually, it's not necessarily, I don't believe that I exist to help companies raise finance. That's part of what I do. But actually, what Swoop is all around is helping those businesses thrive and create the stories, I guess, around job creation, wealth creation, new products, launching new products. And for me, if we can support a business and they can, tell their story to a wider audience, that obviously helps Swoop become more successful to a certain extent, and it's better than me beating the drum or spending lots of money on marketing. It comes down to that third-party validation of what we're trying to do, and hopefully the stories that we can create off the back of sessions like this and encouraging people to do that will help us all do really well. There's another couple of questions coming through actually, so let me just go to those. Karen said she agrees. Thank you. That's perfect.
There's also coming from Karen there about the story of the business in India.
Yes.
Make those stories, Karen. They are of interest in the UK. I think there's another angle. Damon and Ted both commented on the vaccine and Brexit coming through. I think there's going to be another angle that comes through, and that's going to be on employment and unemployment. And particularly, we're going to be starting our own businesses and running our own businesses because employment is not going to be there. And there's going to be a focus as well on female entrepreneurs within this. So a lot of the unemployment that's coming out of the high street retail will be females. So there will be a lot of lifestyle business stories, very much like this one that you've mentioned here from Artisan Nation, that are going to be of interest in the coming year. So that is one worth flagging, certainly, and there will be journalists that are interested in that.
Sure. You see, one of the things that you might say that I'd say that, wouldn't I? But it's perfectly true, is that the power word in public relations is the word relationships. And the truth is, your business, nothing happens without a relationship between you and your publics. You notice this tie because the shirt is white. You notice the shirt is white because the tie is dark. It's all about your relationship with your environment. And this is the whole shtick of PR. Now, if you're a small business and you don't have a massive budget, how are you going to build those relationships? So, I mean, to Damon's question, why should Swoop, people who help companies to kind of create and find their finance and so on and so forth, why should they have something to do with a company like JournoLink? I think it's because we will enable the businesses, or we can support the businesses and help the businesses to thrive and grow. That's what PR is all about, building those relationships. And without those relationships, nobody makes any money.
I actually think it's a lot more commercial than that, if I'm honest, Ted. What Swoop are trying to do is lend money successfully to successful businesses and see those businesses thrive. The best way you drive your sales up is by getting people to buy your product and use your services. And the best way you get people to do that is by getting your brand out there and getting the positive comments around your brand that people will react to and respond to. So, it seems to me a very, very logical relationship that we have at JournoLink with Swoop, which sort of squares that circle. Don't underestimate the importance of these external and independent comments about your brand and your business. They fundamentally drive up your sales. They will drive up your web visits, your web traffic. And that's what you're going to succeed on. And that's how you're going to get out of the pandemic and rebuild your businesses on.
Hopefully.
We have a couple more sort of questions in the Q&A. One from Martin, I think, was about the power of leveraging names and celebrities in your PR. Is that important?
Yeah, really good point, actually. Something that we've not said is in the body of your release, there are four key things to think about when you're putting your press release out. One's your headline. Really make that spinny. Make it about 35, 40 characters for the real meat of the headline. So that's what hits the iPhones. And don't go more than about 150 letters in your headline. So headline's important. Then the story in the body. The image, we talked about all those three things. The one thing we've not talked about is a quote. Always get a good quote in there. And if you can get a local dignitary to give you that quote, then use that. Local MP, local head of the Chamber of Commerce, a celebrity. If you can get a quote from somebody who is recognized, use that quote, put that name in. And the reason why that's quite important is, one, that quote is most likely to be used. Journalists, Ted will forgive me saying this, but they're pretty lazy. And if you tell them what to write and they can copy and paste it, they'll be very grateful. So if you've got a good quote in there, they'll use that. But also, if it's from somebody that's recognized, that name will often pop up on the alerts that journalists have got set up. And that will bring your release to front of mind in front of the journalist. Yeah. So if you've got a good name in there, use it. We've seen headlines that have got celebrity names in. Be a bit careful about using celebrity names if they don't know you're using them, because that can come and bite you on the butt a little bit. I mean, I generally used to have the sort of the rule that I put anything in a headline that wouldn't end me up in prison. That's a bit extreme. Do think about what you put in there and think how you use people's names. But if you use them, that will help you get your release picked up.
I'm just conscious of times. Moshin's put a really good point on here. Firstly, thank you for your feedback, Moshin. That's brilliant about Neil and using Suite, fantastic. But his story around their business and changeahead.org.uk, how do they share that? And then there's another question from Kieran, who basically says, will some of the stuff we've talked about here be replicated if we join JournoLink? So I guess,
again, Ted, comment on these as well. But I mean, Moshin, you've got a great story. This is a local story. It's a local success story. Your local media would be really interested in how you are supporting poverty alleviation, homeless support in your area. I'll pretty well guarantee you put that out to the local media, they will take it. So, just be really honest about that story going out. Keren's comment again, incredible stories about women doing things. When we get a media request coming through looking for a female entrepreneur, we normally get about 7 or 8 times the number of sponsors that we would get from a request coming through looking for a male entrepreneur. Yeah. Right? So there are journalists really keen to hear about the stories of female entrepreneurship. When you post your release out through JournoLink, we ask you to tick various sectors and headings. If you tick that, if you send that one out of stories like that with the diversity heading ticked, you will pick up those journalists who are interested in female entrepreneurship. Ted, do you want to add to that? I mean, you're the journalist. You're presumably...
Well, you see, the anything that relates to your impact in your local community is very important. I mean, it's said that a brand, a company has 3 brands. It's got a corporate or a financial brand. It's got a market brand, i.e. the products and so on it sells. It's also got a social brand, and the social brand of the company relates to what it does with its local community. And research at Harvard and other places has shown that companies with a strong social brand connection to their communities are the ones that survive catastrophes far better than the companies which just basically parachute in, make their money and leave. So if you're doing things which is connected to your local environment, your local environment will pick up on it, the local media will pick up on it. Everybody is a winner.
I mean, both of these have got great angles to them. You've got stories there with angles. You absolutely should be shouting about them.
So I'm really just conscious of time. So we've kind of overrun a little bit, but a couple of things that I think we should probably just point out. I've used PR agencies in the past and different businesses I've been involved in, and the cost can run into sort of thousands of pounds a month. I know that. if not multiple £1,000s a month. Where is kind of JournoLink's typical price point, and how do people kind of like maximize the use of it to a certain extent? Or
so, Damon, various price points on it, but the base model, which is the one that suits most businesses, runs out at just below £50 a month. And if you subscribe through the Swoop link, that will be sent to you and is on the Swoop website. We provide a bit of a discount for Swoop users. So basically less than a cup of coffee a day is what we charge people to use the platform. We've spent a lot of money building it. It's an intelligent platform. It's largely automated now, so that we can afford to run it at that sort of pricing. So this is costing you pennies rather than thousands of pounds for you to use. And you absolutely should be using it as a business. As I said, nothing wrong with using an agency. But as you say, Damon, it can rise into several thousands of pounds for you to use that. And a lot of businesses then become disappointed with what their return on investment is, things like that. So, I would say use a platform. We get some businesses use it once and then delist. That's very short-sighted. And the steer we normally give to businesses, use it for a year and see what you get. If you don't get coverage after it, then fine, walk away. But it's cost you about £500 for the year, something like that. Okay. And that's very, very good value. We normally say to businesses, you might have to put out 2 or 3 releases before you do get any pickup. Yeah. But then you start getting picked up and you get recognized. And it comes back to Tet's point. If the journalist gets to know you, they will come directly to you rather than waiting for you.
And we will send out a link to this. We've recorded this session as well, so we'll send out a link to that and a link to JournoLink after this today. I think if it's okay, guys, I'm gonna wrap the session up. But just to say thank you so much for being candid and open with us. I've really enjoyed that. I've certainly learned a lot. The reason why I'm keen to get off is that I've actually got my first face-to-face meeting for about 6 months at 12 o'clock.
Enjoy.
It's in a pub about 5 miles away, and I'm having a Scotch egg and a pint.
So, Damon, we're going to be looking for a press release from Swoop later on that says why face-to-face meetings over a pint in a pub really do work.
Good. Well, I'll try and come.
Especially when there isn't an electric fence around.
Well, I'm hoping there isn't one. I am actually quite looking forward to it because I think, all this stuff virtually is brilliant, but I'm actually going to see an old colleague of mine who's doing some work for me, and sitting in a room looking at some spreadsheets and talking about business face-to-face is brilliant. But okay. I've really enjoyed that session today. Thank you to the people for dialing in and listening to us, and thanks, guys, for your time. Really, really worth it.
Absolute pleasure. Good to speak with you. Thanks,
really
David.
Nice to see you. Take care. All the best,
Good
everybody.
to be here. Have a great day. Bye. Bye.